Says we're live. Okay. Go to the thing. Okay. Do you mind? Let's see if you can. Okay. You're good. If you want to send out a group text somebody, just tell them to go to the New Life channel. We still good? Okay. Melissa, if you want to get everybody, the group, tell them and then we can send the link out when it's done, right? So, okay. Anyway, all right. 6:25. My deepest apologies. We had a technical madness. So, Jesus says again, for this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? I'm going to backtrack a little. For this reason, when it says for this reason, we actually need to go back up, okay, to 6:19, okay? And when he's saying don't worry about what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear, okay? When he's saying this for this reason, he gives reasons in the above verses as to why he tells you not to worry, okay? And you look at even verse 19, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Matthew, for where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. So this has to do with a mindset, okay? Meaning we spend a lot of our lives worrying about this stuff, okay? But I want you to look at the first thing. Don't store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. I want you to catch something. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. This is not telling you to not ever store up for winter with your harvest. This is not telling you to not budget. But the point is, what you treasure is what you store up, meaning this, the spiritual and the physical. Some people, all that they treasure is all that they own or all that they can see physically. All that they treasure is what they think their worth is. That's their value system. So when Jesus really gets into not taxing over food or drink, it isn't a God. It isn't something you bow to. It isn't something that your heart is given to. It isn't something you give all your energy to and you put your faith in. Now, again, this is a mindset when you do this. It really is getting in number one, what you treasure cannot be what can be taken away by man. What you treasure cannot be what a person can just simply come and steal. And all that I value has been stolen. So everything that means something to me has been taken away. Now, this is really important because when you look at, this truth makes plain sense. So when you look at it and say, okay, we don't want to get caught up with placing a value on something that Jesus says is not the treasure of our life. Let me explain something. When Jesus truly becomes our treasure, it will show in how we handle our even our money affairs. But one thing is really important that Jesus gets in for this reason, all right? Be careful of what you treasure. So he's saying, don't spend all your time worrying about, well, I'll eat, well, I'll drink. I know how many zeros are behind the mark. But think about this. He reveals something, the very clear connection. In fact, how many times do people treasure? I knew a man that his worth, he believed it dipped right under, and this is a real dramatic thing I went through when I was really young, 18. His worth dropped below $1 million, and I'm talking his liquidable worth dropped below $1 million. He had made a lot of money and had a lot of success, and a lot of regular people go, well, that's awesome, And in that era, we're talking decades ago. So we're talking that dipping right at the million mark would be, I don't know, worth 5 times what it is today, or even 10 times. This is many years ago. He was convinced that, he dipped. They were having a bad year. And he went in his room. He took a copy of a Bible, which obviously he didn't understand. He took a .38, he put it to his chest, and he pulled the trigger. 2 problems. He had 2 kids, and they had lost their mother 9 years previous to a heart attack. He was the only father they had, but there was an insurance policy that actually would be honored even with a suicide. So in his mind, to hit that mark under 1 million and to get into 6 digits and not 7, it was unbearable. His life was not livable. And it would seem noble. He was thinking of his kids because, but all he treasured was what he owned. And the proof is in the pudding, because when you dip below a certain amount, therefore you're willing to take your own life. And in some kind of twisted way, his kids would inherit some money, therefore they would be taken care of. But if he would kill himself, and obviously the mind that does that's not thinking rationally, and even you get into some mental problems there. But that said, he was a good businessman. I knew him for years. He was sharp, he was smart, he had made his fortune from the ground up. He didn't inherit money. But again, that's obvious when you put a pistol in your chest and you actually pull the trigger. And my dad, his oldest son, found him. And I remember, what's interesting, because I remember his son saying he was really mad at him, understandably, because their mom had passed some years previous. All they had was their dad left. And I remember his son told me something. He said, I don't understand it, because we just needed a father. They were raised in privilege. They had a lot of things, but I remember his son looking at me and really angry. He just said, how could the blankety blank do this? Because we lost our mom. We just needed a dad. And him being a good dad had nothing to do with whether we were millionaires or not. I didn't have any answers. I was really young, you know what I'm saying? But it's just one of those poignant moments that you remember in your life. And it's interesting, because when you get into not worrying about you will eat, but why do we spend all the time worrying about what we'll drink, what we will wear, how much money we make, why is that the central core of our existence? None of this says to never make a dollar. None of this says to never be responsible with finances or have stewardship, but it points to what you treasure, because that's going to guide you. And it says where your treasure is, your heart is. There's an insight here, okay? If what you treasure is really where your heart's going to be, that means that's what you're going to serve. Now, that said, I'm not talking about somebody that has a lot of money, puts the money in a pile and bows down and worships. No, but you serve it. It calls the shots. It tells you what to be obedient. It tells you how much to give. It tells you how much not to give. It decides steps you'll take and steps you won't take. So when you look at, be careful not to, treasure, because what you treasure, your heart will be. Christians have a hard time with this because we live in a material world. So we're stuck between two things of, now I can tell you something right now. Obviously, being in ministry, I've also did construction work. I've been in different situations. But when giving lacks, there's a hurt. Even now, we've had some changes in giving. I'm behind on my mortgage. That's not a proud thing I'm proud of. It came out of nowhere, let me tell you. I believe me, I didn't see it coming when it came, but it came. So then you got to take sometimes the trials in your life, and you have to square them and say, okay, what are we going to do with this? How am I going to do this? And the thing that's important is making moves by what you treasure. What you treasure will cause an obedience one way or the other. And none of this is reckless, and none of this says don't ever work or never save. But the problem really isn't possessing, it's being possessed by your possessions. The problem isn't saving money. That's not it at all, really. But when Jesus says take no thought, because in that day, though, believe me, that eating, drinking, I eat and I drink, and if I wouldn't, I would die. So even in the context where Jesus talked, but he starts to talk for this reason, and he explains in 19, even in 2023, real quick, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Now this is the reason I went backwards, because Armand covered it, is because there's a clear connection to what you treasure most as to that which either allows part of your light to be darkness or your light to be full of light. And this is an interesting thing, because really when you get into, what you treasure, your heart will be there. So don't spend your life worrying simply about material things, because the real treasure isn't found in any of those. You can take a man and put him through financial hardship. I've been through plenty. I've made money. I've lost money. I've hit hard times. Even now, this situation I'm in, I look at, but this is the thing you have to start understanding. Part of what will keep my sanity, part of what will keep me moving is what I think is most important. Now, a lot of times what you treasure dictates. And I can remember getting into ministry years ago. I wasn't one of those guys that said, I'm going to trust God and quit working. In fact, that wasn't it at all. I kept working. I didn't say I'm called to ministry, and if I work, I can't make a tent. Never had that mentality. But there were times in ministry where a particular thing came up where I had to make a choice because I would have actually not been able to do the ministry and the schedule of the ministry. And I've told the story a lot. So where my lifeblood, my financial lifeblood was put on the line. It was at that moment you really find out what you treasure. Now that's funny, but it's mostly when your faith has been put on the line that you find out a lot of what you treasure. A lot of times it's what you put on the line. When stuff is put on the line, I've seen people go, oh, heck no. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I got to do this. And I've seen people drop really crucial ministry, meaning it isn't about jumping and saying, I'm no longer going to work because I'm called to ministry. But sometimes in the course of ministry, there are very clear lines drawn to where if I do this, I can't do this. And then you make a decision. I've seen many men when it interfered with their level of comfort, not a chance. They weren't going there. It wasn't even a thought. It was automatic. So I hope you get out of when we're reading verses 25 through the rest that you start to understand, but there is a connection between what you treasure and whether the light stays pure in you or whether there's a darkness within your light. A lot of believers they have stuff they treasure above Jesus or mostly his will. So anyway, and you know, it's funny. When I took steps, there's many. It's just not one step. A lot of times you take one step, it doesn't mean that you'll never have to take another step. But I remember being approached by actually a minister that called my faithfulness into question, all kinds of stuff. And God, as I told the story for years, we don't need to go through the whole thing, but on the 12th hour, I kept my job. And they made an allotment and the whole thing. Now, isn't it funny? Because I was faithful to God and God was faithful to me. I was told there's a termination, and I get the day before it says, guess what? They're not going to be terminated. Imagine that. Imagine if I would have just said, no, heck no, I'm not. You know what I mean? I would have been shifted. Ministry would have actually been hurt. I wouldn't have been able to do it because of the schedule. The kids that I was pastoring would have had no youth pastor. It would have been a horrible situation. There was actually, to me, spiritual lives on the line. But again, you get into this thing. But it's interesting. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other. It's right back to the verse 25. Because these things are where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. There's an issue there that the previous verses that Armand covered it. When it comes to what shall I eat, what shall you drink, there's a definite connection of what I count as treasure. There's a definite connection between what I treasure in a way becomes a master. So a lot of believers have they have masters, at least they think they can. They'll serve possession, and yet they want to be a bond. Really work that way because it doesn't say you can't be devoted to the one or the other. Now, here's the other thing when it comes to two masters. A lot of times we believers will get two masters. We will pretend that we can have them both and that Jesus will not be affected by the other master. That none of it says that you can't try to have two masters. People do it all the time. Their pocket idols right out of Egypt. But they're all gods. They concealed them in their tent. They concealed them. They were little. They idol worship the gods of Egypt. Even though they were taken out of Egypt, still carried them with them. So, in fact, you even see, how many remember when God would deal with idolatry and they had to find the stuff that was taken, they went tent to tent and finally found the culprit. But that's the bottom line. Therefore, with this in mind, okay, with this in mind that you're not supposed to store up your treasures, but most importantly, be careful of what you treasure and treasure the things that are eternal and cannot be touched. treasure your relationship with Christ, treasure your obedience to Christ. Let those be the things that you place on a high value. And then we move forward tonight. So again, there's this thing to where we serve only that which we see, maybe something that makes us feel good for a season and that. So this is all about treasuring. None of the you having money or any of it, but this is why the dividing line can be really kind. You don't realize sometimes we can treasure the wrong thing. It's virtually, we will place an importance sometimes on things that don't deserve it, and we will often place an importance on things that weren't. It's not that they weren't supposed to be in our life, but how we perceived them was the problem. There are many things in your life that God would have you use. There are many things in your life that can be important, but there's a fine line between that and all of a sudden you look at that thing and it becomes a treasure work. It's like saying, because of these realities, you don't want to let darkness in. You can't serve two masters. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to let darkness get in the light in you as a believer. Then you get divided, okay? And that's fun. But I like before 24 where Armand stopped, you can't serve two masters. That's it. Something has you and it's mastering over you. And you see it, and it is calling the shots to any area. You need to know something. If it's really not the Lord, so it's like a harsh reality, guys. Are you with me on that? You cannot. Every believer, if they're do it all the time, but I will say this: it is prideful to cause us to believe we can have two masters and survive. But that didn't stop Israel, did it? That doesn't stop Christians when they get into pocket idolatry and where they serve a whole lot of things with Jesus and other over them. So let's go to 25 again. Don't be worried about your life. It doesn't mean you don't say, where will we buy food? It doesn't mean you will say, I want to get a drink. It doesn't mean, but it says, for this reason, I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Now, a lot of times people teach us like, don't really, and they're missing part of the point. Okay. When you really read this, what it's saying is the spiritual supplies the physical. If I walk with God, do I believe that a healthy walk with Jesus leads me into the right? That a healthy walk with Jesus causes me to also eschew or resist ways God? This is really critical because it says, do not worry. If I had to do a gauge in my life of every minute I spent worrying about what shall I eat, what shall I drink, the numbers would be too high. I can guarantee you that. They would be too high. It consumes people. Now, many times what we do in our mind, we read a verse like this and we agree with it, but we go, but you know what, Lord? I mean, I got some serious issues I'm dealing with. I do too. In fact, I rarely like to open up that I'm behind on this or behind on that, or I had a sudden loss of income. It's relevant. Do not worry about your life. That's the crucial issue. You're going to be in fear in your life in any area. It's going to consume you and it's going to run you. If you caught up in this, you're going to get into trouble. And according to the previous verse, there will be compromise. If you get caught up into fear, worrying about your life, what shall I eat? If that becomes your focus, you will do things to make money many times that God never willed you to do. When you treasure simply money on its own merit, you will get greedy most of the time. You will get selfish. I've seen it too many times. I've also seen even believers who had this idea they just wanted to have a lot of money. It's never worked. In fact, I've seen stories I can tell you that you would almost cry, where I've seen not only downfalls of Christians, but Christian men of God. And yet that's just, and it's not the way we're all to think. But I want you to think about this. You can be caught up in something. Again, you don't want to be there, okay? This is important. But now when you think about these warnings, take no thought or don't worry about tomorrow, okay? I want you to think about this for a minute. I'm just going to rifle through this. How many times have you worried about that? How much emotion have you given to fearing tomorrow, fearing finances, fearing them in such a way to where it consumed you? Because quite frankly, you've been putting your faith in the dot and the decibel and the zero so much, you honestly believe the only thing that you can see is the only thing that backs what you can see. And what I've learned through the years is that God opens opportunity. I'm talking in the physical realm, but they open in the people hear this, they've never lived things out of left field that I couldn't imagine. But I want to be in a place based on what we calculate this, that I can honestly tell you, if you think you something and whatever fear or worry has thwarted you from going into that calling, or it's thwarted you from really step God, because in your estimation you looked around and said, I'm going to do this, and this has to in a serious way. God wants you to be freed up. What shall I wear? Think about this stuff, though. I looked at these categories, I mean, drinking is important because without water, you die. Eating is important. You can fast for a while, but you got to have food and drink because you die. There's a reality. Here's the thing. We need to understand life is about more. There's a lot more to life than whether you're dressed a certain way or not dressed a certain way. But a lot of believers, we really get into the temporal. We do it in such a way that's political. But I will say this. We're coming into the tail end now where not only was there a ton of lies, the COVID, there was a real COVID. That's not what I'm saying. But the fear that was cast, I just get amazed at lies that were blatantly told again and again and again. I get amazed at Christians that got into fear. I know Christians right now, they still haven't come out. I'm not kidding. They get their groceries delivered. They're wearing masks inside. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. It's not actually rational because it doesn't match what we dealt with. None of it does. Now we're finding out. It's just interesting because I could have told you this 2 years ago. They've hidden where it came from. Now they're actually finally saying where it came. There were so many angles that they did where they damned doctors that didn't go along with the narrative. And the sad thing about it is we needed all of science to speak. We needed preventatives, we needed clinicals, we needed all of that. And what you find out is there was a literally destroying good names. But I watched COVID do people right now because of fear, simple fear of a germ. They won't even go out of their house. I'm saying now, I don't mean they got over it. It's still going. And the interesting thing, people acted irrational. They did things that hurt. They took medicines that weren't necessarily all they cracked up to be. In hindsight, I believe it might be one of the worst. We've handled this worse than it's going to go down in history. But I think about fear in general and how people were paranoid. You thought the bubonic plague was going. I have friends that were absolutely, family members that were killed by medicine they took. I have other ones that their kidneys were destroyed. And it's coming out now. And I mean, you can't, eventually truth comes out. And it's just funny to watch what we're learning, even in this season. The lies were so massive, but let's put all that aside. The Christian was faced with a simple thing. Are you going to be paranoid? Are you going to take a medicine? In fact, again, doctors are talking, real science is breaking through because they can't hide it anymore. Whether you had myocarditis, and it's interesting. They're going to hear, what bothers me the most is you should never be sitting in your house for years. That's ridiculous. I'm telling you, that's ridiculous. You should never be paranoid. Specifically, then we find out the numbers were increased by about 40%, meaning the deaths, they were counting everything. Guy had a stroke and died of a stroke, but had COVID. It was a COVID death. Early on, they even said this. It's like, but anyway, I think about not to fear what I eat, what I drink, but I think about our society has went through a straining of fear where fear was absolutely used and it was irrational. I mean, I've seen people driving with a mask on in their own car with the windows closed. And I'm going, are you kidding me? And there's flat out fear, which is irrational. And I think one thing that we all learned, and I'm just saying this tonight because I'm not getting heavy into it. One thing that hit me right away is I'm never going to move out of flat out fear. And if I run into somebody that's paranoid and they're telling me, no, I'm sorry. Paranoid is irrational. If somebody said, well, here's some real science and let's do this, I'd be great. Okay. But when you run on fear and propaganda, no, never. Never, never, never. Now, there was rumors that people were licking glasses where a COVID person had, because no, that was stupid. But we've learned a lot, and a lot more is going to come out. It's funny, though. Because again, I saw fear control everything and everybody. I saw people so paranoid. And like I said, the Lord spoke to me early on and said, there's going to be people that come out of this with fear. They'll never be the same. And I literally said, did I hear, Lord, never? You mean never? He said, they will never be the same. They will never be free, meaning they'll get into a bondage to fear, or even when this is long past, they will have it, the fear. There was gospel ministry to the lepers in the 2nd century, where people actually shared the gospel with the lepers because they had nobody to share the gospel. And there were people that actually went into the leper colonies to share the. But I saw people no longer worship. I saw people have no more human contact. It damaged people, something fierce. Now we know kids, we shut it for nothing, absolutely nothing. But again, the more that's going to come out, people are going to be upset because they were corralled into a box, and they were actually paranoid to a degree that there was a threat, but what they put out there was far different than what really is going on. And I would ask all people, but again, what happens if you don't worry about what you eat? What happens if you're not caught up and you don't worry about what you shall drink, and you treat fear as an enemy? And I think that's the big enemy here. We spend most of our life worrying about what we shall eat or what we shall drink. And I only brought that up because I saw such an enormous paranoia that it was mind-boggling to me. Oh, I wasn't reckless, like running. But it's funny, again, I just say that, and it wasn't through some radical negligence. It was going around. But do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. Here's the point. Some people go, flowers, you're going to look at flowers, and that's proof that God can take care of your clothing. The point is this. If you look at a plant that was created by God, and water and sunlight and soil feed it, God has an ecosystem that takes care of it. There's more to this compared to flowers. And let me explain it. God has an ecosystem, a support system for nature, for trees, for flowers. And in those days, I got to tell you, the air was a lot cleaner. And what it's trying to say is God has an ecosystem for you. God has a supply system for you. Flowers are flowers. They're not as important necessarily. I don't value a flower above a man. So what Jesus is really, what he gets into this saying, why are you worried about clothing? And he uses the flowers. What he's really getting at is saying, God has a supply system. Look how he did it for flowers that seem insignificant. They're pretty, but I don't see anybody putting a flower to bed and telling it stories and trying to feed it. So he's like saying, hey, look at the flowers, because in the same way, what's it saying? Solomon also, nature reveals the brilliance of God and the supply line of God. Do you believe it is the big question? Do you really believe that the name on the check truly